The wage theft bill that was introduced last spring under that bill, which was actually passed recently by the state Senate, workers but not the House yet. Workers in California are paid less than legal minimum wage. They're paid less than the minimum wage about 372,000 times every week, according to the U.S. Department of Labor. Their employers are seldom called to account, even when they're ordered to pay back wages by the state. Only a fraction of these employees ever collect what they are owed. Now, I'm going to join the rest of you down here. This bill that I referred to was authored by Senate Leader Kevin De Leon. It would require companies to post a $150,000 bond toward any back wages that were not paid. If the company fails to pay what the state orders, then they take the bond. Companies that don't post a bond would face a stop work order or a lien from the Labor Commissioner's office that would attach to a property owned by the employer. This is really designed to get at a collection problem. I mean, even when it's clear that people have been not paid at all, not paid what they were promised, not paid what they were owed, that there's a way that they can get the money back. Well, wait a minute, why is this necessary? This bill or this law, can't someone who's been a victim of this just file a lawsuit?
Well,
any of you?
I'm sure we can all speak to this. I'm Alexandra from Kiwa. No, unfortunately, Kiwa's been working with workers to file claims with the Labor Commissioner for 23 years. We almost never lose a case, but once they win that case, it's almost impossible to collect because of the corporate shell game, because of all these.
You mean the companies changed their name and their address?
They changed their name, they moved their money out, etc. So what SB 588 does is try to give workers a better chance of actually collecting once they've gone all the way through the process of winning a judgment.
Something I want to add about that too is that it's really mind-blowing to me that employers don't even have to change their name, can just actually completely stay in business, and there's no increased penalties if you don't pay. Wow. So usually the process with the Labor Commissioner's office takes about 2 years. At the end of 2 years, it's usually low-wage workers who are filing these claims, right? You're already frustrated, hopefully have another job. If you get that judgment, only 17% in the state collect any money, like collect even $5. And so I work with restaurant workers, which have about an 8 in 10 violation rate of wage and hour law. That's by the DOL. And a lot of times restaurants will not just close down or change their names because people come to that restaurant because of the brand. But we've just seen incredible impunity where there are repeat violators and there's no consequences. So it's just built into the profit model of the industry.
And I think, just connecting it to the issue of trafficking is that, this wage theft, it's all kind of a spectrum, right? Because with wage theft, then the workers end up subsidizing these industries and the employer's profits. So labor that they end up not getting paid for, that they are performing, is their wages are stolen, and in effect, then their labor and their time is stolen, and and there's individuals and companies that are then profiting from that. And so it is a whole spectrum that we see. We work mostly with domestic workers, caregivers, and this is one of the industries that we've seen so many trafficking victims come out of. And because when you create vulnerability and when you, have not strong institutions to enforce labor standards, then you create situations for human trafficking and wage theft. It's all part of the same spectrum that exploits the workers.
What are some of the other industries where we we see a lot of this wage stuff?
Well, there's many
Maybe the leaders, I know, do probably.
Yeah, many of the
make a
low-wage
long list,
industries, so those that were mentioned, restaurant and home care, there's, we see a lot in retail, warehouse, well, we hear a lot about the port trucking industry, which involves a lot of misclassification. Most of our members are restaurant workers, but we work with people across the board in retail, maintenance, landscaping, parking services, janitorial. It's the whole range of low-wage industries.
Do any of you have any litigation as an organization right now with regard to wage stuff?
So you mean ongoing cases?
Yeah, cases.
Yes, definitely. So we, as a part of the California Domestic Worker Coalition, we're able to win overtime rights for domestic workers here in California, because for over 75 years, domestic workers were excluded actually from labor protections. And on the federal level, unfortunately, caregivers are still excluded from any labor protections which a majority of them fall into a companion exemption, which means that they can get paid $1 an hour, they can get paid nothing an hour, and on a federal level, that is still legal because they are not part of the labor protections. So, so in the care industry here, we're in this age where the baby boomers have started coming to the retirement age. So like 10,000 people every day are in their retirement age. So the need for care is really growing, but we don't have good systems in our society to make sure that everyone can afford the care that they need. And right now, the caregivers are really subsidizing with their labor a lot of the care. There are many that are receiving less than minimum wage, like maybe $2 or $3 an hour, and working around the clock. And we have, we have cases that we're filing with many agencies that often take a lot of money from the families and then still pay less than minimum wage to the workers. And so we have a case up in the valley that's actually about to break. So I can't actually mention the name of the agency yet, but we're about to file our case with them, where they actually, when the Bill of Rights was passed, they started charging the families more because they said that they have to charge more to pay overtime to the workers, but then they never gave any overtime to the workers and actually pay less than minimum wage. So and they have like 1,000 workers that they work with.
Have any of you had a situation where a worker or a group of workers were not paid at all?
That happens every day. People, that happens very, very often. Sometimes people will be hired and then not paid at all, and the employer will say, "Oh, I need to wait to get my pay, and then I'll give it to you in a month. Just wait another month. Oh, it's another week, another month," and it just goes on and on until finally the workers realize they're actually not going to get paid, and sometimes the employer is not around by that time. So it makes it very hard to collect. But I was going to say something about the litigation, because Kiwa has been involved in litigation in the past, although currently we don't have lawyers on staff. And although we will partner with law firms or legal service providers when it really makes sense for a campaign, I just wanted to emphasize that most workers in low-wage industries don't have the kinds of cases that will get lawyers, especially from the private bar, to take their cases. The amount of wage theft is really, really huge for the workers. On average, 12.5% of their annual salary is stolen every year. That's a huge amount. That is the difference between sometimes staying in your house or getting kicked out on the street, eating and not eating. But for a lawyer who's taking sometimes up to 40% of whatever a worker eventually settles for, it's still not enough to get a legal representation. So that's why the Labor Commission process is so, so important, and that's why we're doing so much together to try to fix that, because bills like SB 588, but also other fixes that we need to put into place, they will make it possible for workers who don't have a lawyer to be able to pursue their claims and then to collect.
Here are just some other statistics. As many as 16% of wage adjustments issued by the state involve instances in which a company had changed names or dissolved. This is according to a 2013 report by UCLA Labor Center. The Labor Center also found that between 2008 and 2011, only 17% of workers who obtained a judgment against their employer ever collected any of the money. So this is a problem, and this is why this bill has been introduced.
Please use the microphone.
Yeah, sorry. This is why the bill's been introduced, because it's very hard to collect, and we have a wave of this sort of activity where people are being not paid at all or not being paid what they're owed. Now, we've got another situation here. This has also been in the news recently. As all of you know, the LA City Council recently voted to increase the minimum wage to $15 per hour, something the county has already done. How does this relate to wage theft, this whole issue of raising the minimum wage? Is it connected in any way with this issue?
Absolutely. So if you do want to start off.
Sure. So there's been a coalition for about 6 years called the Los Angeles Coalition Against Wage Theft to really define the problem, because I remember, and it's great you're a journalist because I think you understand the influence of journalism. When journalists first started talking about wage theft a few years ago, every time the word would come up, they would put these little bunny ears around it. And so we knew we were getting traction when over the years that dropped away. And it really legitimized, yes, workers are being stolen from, and actually Los Angeles has the highest rate of wage theft of any city in the country. And it's precisely because of the concentration of low-wage industries in Los Angeles, like car wash, retail, grocery, care workers, day laborers, restaurant. Those are all the biggest in Los Angeles. And so in the city, a lot of organizations came together to say, we have a huge enforcement problem and the city needs to do something about it. And we had been working on it for several years, and I know that City Attorney Mike Feuer came and talked in the morning. So it was a breath of fresh air when he took office, because that's when the legislation really started to get traction. And then with all of the Fight for 15 and the movement around minimum wage, it was kind of a perfect storm of talking about the wage is too low, we need to raise it, but at the same time we need to enforce it. And so when the minimum wage ordinance was passed, on the exact same day there was also a wage theft ordinance passed. So the policy in the city has 3 parts. It's a comprehensive framework. We call it collect, protect, enforce. Collect addresses the collections crisis you're talking about. For example, the bond at the state level is used to address that, which people are winning but they don't get their money. Protect is retaliation, because about half of the cases where people file claims, there's really intense retaliation. I've personally seen workers even sued by their employers for extortion when they file claims. So it's really extreme. Employers will also threaten to call immigration on workers, which is illegal. And then the enforce part, and that's really what we're working on, and we want to keep everyone updated in the coming years, is we want to make sure that the city puts enough investigators and invests enough money, and also partnerships with organizations that can actually do the outreach and education. So we're really happy that the minimum wage passed along with the enforcement ordinance.
Did either one of you want to add to what you said on that?
Well, it's just that the wage theft provisions locally and also on a statewide level are so important, because if you don't have, a way to enforce the laws, you in effect don't have a minimum wage, and that drives, standards down everywhere. And then bad actors make it hard for good actors who also want to, like high road employers who want to pay. It's hard for them to compete. Right, and it drives down standards and creates conditions that, people can't afford enough to eat. They can't afford for health care, but they should be able to a lot of times, or they should be able to do that more if they were actually paid what they're supposed to be paid. It would save, it would create a better quality of life here, like in Los Angeles, if we did have a really strong, and really good wage theft as long as it all implements well, then, we need that to be able to make sure that our city is strong. Like Na said, like if you let people start to slip through the cracks and you don't care for all of the people who are the majority of people in the city, then the whole basis of the economy actually, goes into crisis. So that's why, and then, all these different levels of exploitation happen. And so wage theft is really important to have. Wage theft provisions against wage theft.
Yeah, I was thinking about this panel today. I was reflecting on the El Monte case, and I was not at staff at Kiwa at the time, so it's very humbling and it's a great honor to be able to learn more about it here today and to actually listen to some of the survivors today. So I really, really appreciated that. But when Kiwa got involved, I think initially the DLSC investigator who we saw in the film, Dong-gun Kim, had contacted us because he had noticed the case or noticed some situation and wanted to find a Thai translator. And at that time we were sharing the offices together, so of course naturally we turned to Chansey and Thai CDC. And Thai CDC did far, far more than translate. Of course, they led this campaign, this historic campaign that would eventually win legal status and over $4 million for the Thai workers. And after the factory was raided, I'm sure people heard earlier today that we heard about the detention at the INS and getting them out. And so all of these issues are so very, very closely connected that if those organizations had not stepped in to make sure the workers were not deported, then the wage theft case would have also disappeared. The whole history would have changed, would have been totally different. And we heard Na talk about all the support they needed around housing services, busing, transportation, and more, and that's all part of that fabric. But the campaign led to the founding of this anti-trafficking movement, and also eventually to the passage of Assembly Bill 633 in 2000, which is a sweatshop reform bill. And that effort was also a big part of the impetus to found the Garment Worker Center, which Kiwa and others also actively supported. And so what I was thinking about this morning is just how all of these things are so very, very closely connected. It is the courage of the survivors who are willing to do things like Flor, reliving your experience and putting that out there, again, going through that pain so that others can learn from it. That's just incredibly generous that you and others are willing to do that. But also all the organizations and advocates who come together to work together and create something bigger, because it is, of course, about the El Monte case, but it's about so much more that came out of that and that continues today.
By the way, just as a side regard to El Monte, one of my former colleagues, Pat Morrison at the LA Times, she had just returned from Paris after the El Monte case, and the situation was discovered. And it was all over the news in France, and she said they kept calling it El Monte. They thought it was English word where you often have a silent E. So it was global news. You made the point just a moment ago that along with the minimum wage, there was a setup for enforcement on wage theft. I believe City Council decided to set aside $500,000 for 5 analyst positions to help with the enforcement. Okay, here's the problem, or at least the problem as some people see it. That's not enough. A University of California Berkeley research team told the City Council that its new wage enforcement division would need 25 investigators to match the efforts of San Francisco, which it views as having one of the best developed programs in the country. We're talking about a good bit of money now. Why should the taxpayer or a taxpayer be willing or happy to pay more taxes for this extra enforcement?
I mean, I have an opinion. I think it's first off, there's no point to pass something that's on a piece of paper and you have 5 people who can't even do their job because you can't really do it with 5 people, which is why actually the agency within the city that's tasked with it, they've come out with their own report, and they've actually said we need like 4 to 5 million a year to do this, and that's what they're asking for from the city. But everything that Aki said is true, because in all of the debate around the minimum wage, one of the key things was people said raising the minimum wage is going to have a stimulus impact on the local economy. It's going to be fantastic. Well, how is it going to have a stimulus impact if people aren't getting paid? So we're not even going to have the positive benefits of the minimum wage increase unless we have the enforcement, you know. And then, of course, there's just everything you said, undercutting responsible businesses, and just the fact that no one should be suffering and working and not getting paid. That's just not right. And unfortunately, it's totally the cultural norm in the practice.
Any of you want to add anything to that about the taxpayers?
The taxpayers' money, yes. I mean, many of our families have to rely on, our tax dollars that are funding public programs because they can't survive on the wages that they're getting because they are not being paid what they should be paid,
right,
what they're earning.
So we're paying either way, right?
So we're paying either way, and so our tax dollars end up subsidizing the businesses too. The businesses being profitable.
Yeah, there's one other consideration as well. One other consideration as well, and that is, if you're paid fully, you can pay your taxes, and that reduces the tax load.
Employers aren't paying payroll tax.
Right.
Yeah. And it'll reduce dependence on the public services once workers are actually getting paid a living wage.
I want to go through all of you one by one and have you tell me what your organizations are doing to get the wage law, the wage stuff bill passed.
So,
and by the way, if you want to add anything with regard to if you think there's something more that should be added to the bill, please comment on that as well.
Oh, yes. Well, no one bill can do it all is what I've very, very clearly learned. And so we want to shoot for the pie in the sky, and then we usually just get one step further. So that's sort of how it works. But Kiwa's one of the co-sponsors of SB 588, and we just felt it was really, really important to try to do something about the totally broken collections process. You were talking about that earlier. The only 17% who see even a dime of their collections is after, as Sophia said, 2 years of going through the process, proving before the state of California, yes, my employer owes me money, and then getting at the end of that 2-year process a piece of paper that you can't feed to your children, that you needed 2 years ago, and that a business is using as their kind of MO for operating. They know they'll just, if they have to pay anything, they'll only have to pay pennies on the dollar 2 years later. So why not keep doing it if there's no enforcement? And that's why we are doing this. One of the really key provisions of SB 588, it's the Fair Day's Pay, is right now if a DLSE investigator walks into a restaurant and finds a wage violation going on, he or she can name the business as well as the person who's the business owner and who's responsible for that wage theft in a citation. But if a worker from that very same restaurant had come into the Labor Commissioner and filed a claim, he or she would only be able to name the business on that claim and would not be able to name the individual who's responsible. The reason why that's so important is that, as you mentioned, by the time you get the judgment, 2/3 of the businesses have gone out of business, or changed their name, or declared bankruptcy, or transferred their assets fraudulently and opened up down the street, or just changed their name by one letter and are still doing the same thing. Given how easy it is for those employers to play this corporate shell game, we think it's imperative that a worker can name that business owner as the person responsible, so that if there is a judgment against them, if they go on and try to open another business, that judgment will go with that person as opposed to die with the business with a new name, with an old name. So that's one of the provisions, and it's really, really important. And I wanted to say that it's, as you mentioned, it passed the Senate, but we still have to go through the Assembly, and it still has to get off the governor's desk. And we're at a critical time with this bill. It's a very, very important one. And in fact, we reached out to caste members to join the campaign because many, many caste survivors of slavery, they go through their situation, they finally get out of their slavery situation, and then find that they're in these horrible situations of wage theft. So how are they going to build that new life? How are they going to, achieve normalcy if the normal is horrible wage theft? So caste understands that clearly, the caste survivors, and they, in fact, are sending a van of people up to Sacramento, I think, about a week and a half to tell them, you've got to pass SB 588. So there's a very clear connection between the trafficking and the wage theft, and we're sending a bus of people up on August 31st to September 1st, so just one night. And if anyone would like to join us, please let us know.
Philippine, well, just also want to recognize the leading role of Kiwa, especially at the state level, to really champion and move this forward. It doesn't happen magically, right, just because it should. It happens because people work hard for it. I think some other provisions that we're looking for wage theft to become, to eradicate wage theft would be, one, to really think proactively how to stop retaliation. So like on the state level, like the worker's identity is totally out there. So it makes it very hard for them sometimes, especially when you have immigration status problems or you have other fears, that you could be retaliated against to actually file these cases. But then also thinking proactively that how liens can be put on property so that they can't be transferred to, so that the owners can't just transfer them to family members and stuff through the process, but from when it starts, and if we can name the individual, put a lien on those assets so that so they can't disappear before the worker has a chance to actually win their case. And for us, if we could tie it somehow to the IRS, who can hunt people down and get, money from them. Right now, it's really, a piece of paper that you have to enforce yourself. And if, a judgment that just puts a slap on a credit mark, a bad credit mark on the business, right? So they can go on operating even with their own name and everything. It's just ridiculous. So we have dreams at PwC that somehow could be linked to their IRS status, so that it can really get paid. And on a national level, we're running and winning domestic workers' Bill of Rights campaigns across the country. So now we have New York, California, Hawaii, Oregon, and Connecticut, and Massachusetts now that have passed Bill of Rights. So. But we need them to be enforced, so enforcement is a part of our ongoing campaign.
And are you working with Kiwa as far as this campaign in the state on this particular bill?
We are in full support of the state campaign, and we're also looking locally at the care industry, like launching specific campaigns against employers, but it won't work very well if we can't get these larger, structures to enforce at the state level, at the city level.
Okay. And again, what are you doing to get the bill passed, and what provisions would you like to see added to it, or what, if you want a separate bill, what more needs to be done besides what's being proposed in this bill?
Well, Rock LA is also in support of Kiwa and the SEIU local that works with janitors and the other groups that have really taken the lead on the state bill, and hopefully sending some people at the end of August too to Sacramento. But locally, we're really focused on trying to make sure that there's strong implementation of the city plan because of what you said, only 5 analysts with 500,000, that's not enough. So I go and talk to workers every day to let them know about, hey, did you know that all of these things that you experience, it's actually wage theft? Like, for example, if you don't get meal and rest breaks, when you have to pay for your own uniforms, when you have to work like 30 minutes before and after you clock in and out. And to do that education. And then on a national level, because in 43 other states in the US, if you make tips, like for example, if you work as a bartender or server and you make tips, you can actually get paid as low as $2.13 an hour. And the assumption, it's called the tip minimum wage, and the assumption is your employer is supposed to make up the difference if you don't get to whatever your local minimum wage is. But again, that never happens. Imagine if you work as a waitress for 2 weeks, you get your check, and at the end, are you really going to go to your manager and say, you owe me $50 more? How do you think that manager is going to react? So at a national level, ROC is working on closing that loophole and making sure that everybody gets one fair wage, because this loophole allows a lot of wage theft to happen.
What are the consequences if this bill is not passed, if there's no strong wage theft measures with enforcement, with teeth?
This bill is focused on collections. If there's no more tools for collections, it's going to remain a 17% collection rate. What do you think, Alexandra?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually going to, it has already, the levels of wage theft have increased, and we keep citing this study from 2010 that by the UCLA Labor Center and Victor Naro, that with data from 2009, because that was a very methodologically sound study that we can, we know is backed up. But we know anecdotally and just from our own experience that the wage theft has actually increased, because when the minimum wage increases, if the enforcement doesn't increase, then the amounts being stolen increase. So we actually know it's much worse. We just keep citing the 2010 figures. But to answer your question, yeah, it'll just, without enforcement, it'll just skyrocket. Someone who is a business owner who I was talking to about this said, yeah, if you don't put enforcement in there, then the underground economy, by which he meant the wage theft economy, is just going to get bigger and bigger exponentially. He used the term exponentially.
Did you have any comments on this? Consequences?
Consequences of it not being passed. Well, I think, we think on a large economy scale, but, all these wage theft cases impact individuals and their families. So the consequences are really real about how they feel every day about, not being able to provide health care, not being able to provide food that's the most nutritious for their family, or have enough food on the table, being able to provide shoes that don't have holes in them. There's all of these very real consequences that our communities, our neighbors, our friends and families will have to live with. So wage theft is about, again, that humanity. You work. This is. It's not charity, and then they're forced to try and beg for charity, right? But they're actually working. It's also about the basic dignity of the individual. So that's the consequence that I think that is the most important, that puts people into desperation and puts them vulnerable to many kinds of scams as well as trafficking situation promises, right? Because they're just struggling to survive day by day, doing the best that they can.
Right. I want to explore that a little bit further. I was wondering if each of you can give me an example. I don't need any names, but like a really egregious, one egregious example involving a person that, just really outrageous, that, and maybe it led to other problems in that individual's life. Who wants to start first?
Well, I have one case. We had a caregiver who was working without pay for 3 months because she was the only one there with the consumer, so she couldn't leave the consumer, right? So she was forced to stay there. She had to pay the food for both of them out of her pocket, and it was only after 3 months when she was finally able to get to a more distant relative to come and relieve her that she could actually leave that situation. So that was 3 months of pay that ended up that the employer had gambled away. And when we went to confront the employer, they automatically said, talk to my lawyer, But that's one, yeah, so that was one egregious case.
Gamble away at their lawyer.
I know. I think the lawyer was a friend, so it was free.
So I was just thinking about one of our board members, Sylvia, and she uses her name, so I know it's okay, as well as other of our members. I was having a conversation with them recently, and they're no longer working there, but they had been working at garment factories where they were making $150 a week, working from 8 a.m. to 6 or 7 p.m. a day, 5 or 6 days a week. And so just, I mean, if you do the math, you see that the really, really horrendous level of wage theft that represents. They never got overtime. They didn't get their adequate breaks. The health and safety conditions were not good. And, you know, I was reflecting that situation, you know, we talk about the modern day slavery, and we see in the photos, we saw the razor wire and the blocked doors, and that is clearly a situation of coerced slavery, you know, where people are physically forced to work and unable to leave. One of the things that Kiwa did during that case of El Monte is that we reached out to Latino garment workers and Latina garment workers who were working in downtown LA in factories that were owned by the same people who owned those El Monte sweatshop factories. And they were not physically under lock and key, but they were also experiencing conditions similar to what Sylvia and our other members still experience. And I have to say that when we talk about slavery versus freedom, or slave labor versus free wage labor, we have this sense that if you're not physically coerced, that you have all of these choices that, oh, should I be a doctor or a lawyer? Should I be a teacher or an artist? And, you know, those are actual choices for people who have the liberty and freedom and conditions to make choices. But if you are working in a job that pays you $150 a week for 11 hours a day, can you say that that's a choice? Can you say that that's free choice? I'm not trying to say that that's the same as the modern slavery conditions of El Monte. Not at all. That is very, very different, because those workers could leave and they could go home. You know, it's not the same. But we have to look at their condition as being also coercive in a way, because they didn't have a free choice, because who would ever choose that, right? And those kinds of conditions, that is why we need to change the conditions in low-wage industries. That's too many people are dealing with this day in and day out. And you know, when I meet Sylvia's children, I think about all those years that they didn't have with their mother. You know, to do all that and come home with $150, it's not right.
Did you have one that you wanted to say?
Sure, and actually this is just the most recent person who came in about 2 weeks ago, because we had folks referred to us by the Division of Labor Standards Enforcement in addition to doing street outreach. Actually, King in the back helped me with it. He was one of the original investigators on the El Monte case. He's a personal friend. So when I have tough things to calculate, I'm like, King, how do I do this?
Thank you.
Okay. But someone came in to the office, and he looked like he was in his 50s, and he was really small. He was like as skinny as I am. And so I was like, okay, what's up with this? And he said, oh, I have an issue. He was working at a restaurant in Los Feliz, a really profitable like diner type of restaurant in Hillhurst. The employer just opened a new cafe last year after being in business for a long time. And he said, well, I've worked there for over 10 years, and I usually work 16 to 17 hours a day, 6 days a week, because I'm the most senior cook. And so they really trust me with everything. And I started asking him more questions, and he said, yeah, I don't get any overtime. And actually, I also have to clean up at the end of the night, because they want to save money and not hire a cleaning crew. And the main reason he had come in was because he said that he was having really, really bad stomach issues, because he would work 16 to 17 hours and not have a break to eat. And so just imagine, like, your longest work day is probably 16 hours, if you can imagine working that and not stopping to eat or sit down. And the reason he had come in, because this had been going on for 10 years, obviously he knew he wasn't being paid overtime. When we see people come in, it's actually not because a light bulb goes off in their head and they realize there's a legal violation. People know that they're not done. It's because there's been a line crossed in terms of personal respect. So he was really hungry one day, it was slow, so he went to the main dining area, sat down, started to eat his lunch really quick. The manager came by and yelled at him and said, hey, there's guests here, nobody should be seeing employees sitting down and working and eating. go to the kitchen if you want to eat. And some clients saw the tone he was addressed in and said like, hey, what just happened? He felt very loyal to the restaurant. He didn't want to say anything. He was like, oh no, it's fine. But then that was the day something clicked, and he was like, you know what, I need to seek some help because my whole body is messed up. And the impact on families, like Alexandra said, people don't see their children. You're spending your whole time working. It's a big issue.
Wow. Well, what can members of the public do to support the passage of this bill?
Well, so of course, I'm going to say yes, support the bill, but it's so much more than that. We need to build the support for community partnerships with the city. We need to, yes, pass this bill, but also support all the organizations that are involved in it, because no one bill is going to solve all the problems. And as we saw with the El Monte campaign, it was really so many different organizations coming together and then creating this change, creating another law, creating the Garment Worker Center, doing all these things, creating CAST, that is what actually creates changes when we can come together like this. So yes, absolutely, please come with us to Sacramento on August 31st to September 1st to pass SB 588. But beyond that, get involved, support your local worker centers, of which we're 3 representatives, and there are more, and just be aware of this. I want to reiterate what Sophia said about I never tell the story about the bunny ears, but that's a great way to tell it. That yeah, when we were doing this 3-4 years ago, nobody knew what wage theft was, and now it's all the politicians know. We see news articles every day. Even the California Chamber of Commerce uses the term to describe a problem that they recognize. It's a huge change, but we have so far to go, and we need everybody's help to do it.
Okay. Here's your turn to ask some questions. Please raise your hand if you have one.
Yeah, I was just curious for consumer awareness, just campaigns related to heightening consumer awareness. I'm almost thinking about in the restaurant industry, when there's a health violation, you get the letter, and it's not the favorable letter. Something that is so simplistic like that, where consumers are able to make choices. So when there's a case and it is determined that there's been wage theft, I guess part of this is a question, as I might have missed the part in terms of if it's stipulated that the time frame in which it's supposed to be paid back, and at some point then it's considered delinquent, where you come up with there's only 17%. And if it starts moving towards that, where there is a delinquency, have that letter out there that says, if you're patronizing this whatever service industry it is, restaurant or anything else, that might really kick some employers in the pants just a little bit. And I just, that's the type of thing that I think as a consumer, knowing that that's happening, your awareness as you're about to patronize an establishment, you might not know, and that could be part of the solution.
No, we have often talked about that and fantasized about that. I think it would be extraordinarily difficult to pass something like that, but we do talk about that, and we would love to see a posting requirement like that. Yeah.
Well, another idea too is, here's something crazy about Yelp. If you go on Yelp and you try to write something about labor conditions, they can actually take down your review, because there's still this mentality that as a customer you can comment on everything, like the ambiance, or like, oh, I didn't like how my plate looked. But somehow, like labor stuff, it's actually in the terms of use policy. You're not supposed to use it, right? So anybody here who's like Yelp elite, you should talk to Yelp about that. And I think also with the city, as we're starting up this city enforcement agency, we'd really like to see a lot of the data publicly available. So if there are businesses that have judgments against them, the city should actually have that database publicly available, because the county has that for health records. You can go on the county website, takes 2 seconds, you can look up the health records of anybody. It would be great if the city can have that. So keep your eye out for that. That may be a public debate in the coming year with need for public comment.
And then, I know the DOL also developed an app, Live, Eat, Work. I can't remember. Is it still?
Eat, shop, sleep.
Eat, Shop, Sleep, which is an app that you can download that has, businesses that have violations with the DOL. Is it only DOL violations, or is it?
It's OSHA and wage hour.
That are on there, so you can actually check a business through that. And also the Immokalee workers also are just being able, have gotten different groceries to now carry fair labor, stickers on produce. Certain key ones, it's not yet, everywhere, but they're also making gains that way. So it's not just like organic, it's kind of like the organic label, but we have like the fair labor label.
Any other questions or comments?
Hi, Carla Salazar again with the LA County Labor. We do have the California Labor Fed, just to comment, the California Labor Fed does have a do not patronize list, so I'm sure we'll be glad to, I'm not going to speak on behalf of the California Labor, but I know as a fact we do have an actual list that you could go online, and we don't patronize non-union certain places. I'm sure we could talk to you guys about kind of incorporating that, because it's all connected, of course, working conditions and all that. So just FYI.
You said something really powerful earlier, that wage theft, on average, people are losing about 12.5% of their income, which is not enough to retain an attorney. But obviously, retaining an attorney can be very empowering for a worker, so they're not going at it alone, especially with regards to, revenge or those kind of tactics. So what incentives do you have for private attorneys to take on some of these cases at low bono or pro bono rates?
Well, what we do, what our organizations do, we're not attorneys, and we don't charge attorneys rates, and we actually work with workers sometimes at no cost or sometimes at low cost. At the Labor Commission, you can name anyone you want to be your advocate. You could name your mom, your grandma, your worker center, your local worker center, anyone you want. So we're able to advocate for workers. We are all able to advocate for workers that way without an attorney, which is not to say that attorneys don't play a really, really critical role for certain types of cases. And in those cases, there are legal service providers like Bethzetic and others that we have worked with and who on their own provide services for workers free of charge. And so there are those folks, but there's just so few and far between, and many those who accept federal funds can't assist undocumented workers, and so that makes an organization like Bethzetic all the more important, because there's so few.
Other questions, comments in the back?
I'm not sure if this was addressed earlier, but what can we as consumers do to be more conscious at the restaurants we eat at? Because I know a lot of times, like for me, it's like, oh, I'd rather spend $10 on Korean barbecue than $20. But also knowing the consequence of that is that I would probably be supporting a restaurant that provides low wages for their workers.
We have claims at all the Korean barbecue restaurants in Koreatown, so you can't go to any of them without
I've got a favorite one I go to. I'm sorry to hear that.
we filed there.
Well, okay, so one thing is, if it's like $10 all you can eat, you can be sure, there's issues. But the other thing is, there's a misconception that it's only mom and pop places or ethnic places. Do folks know about the chef Thomas Keller?
Yeah.
He owns like French Laundry, and he's probably like the most well-known chef in the U.S. Well, his restaurant per se in New York just got cited for $500,000 in tip stealing violations. So one of the really important things to understand about wage theft is that, yes, there are some malicious employers, but actually, like I said it before, when you have an industry with an 8 in 10 violation rate, it's not because people don't know or are malicious, it's because it's so normal and there's not really any consequences for it, right? Because even if your employee does file, they can't collect. So I would say, first off, like even if you go to a place where it's like $50 for pancakes, that's no guarantee that there's not wage theft happening. But one thing you can do is just observe when you dine. Is there like sufficient coverage on the floor? Do people look really stressed out? Does it look like there's enough staff? Talk to the people who are working. And you can also ask to talk to the manager and just say, I love eating here, and I've gotten really great service. And I'm also aware that sometimes people don't get their meal and rest breaks in many other restaurants, and I hope that everybody here is getting their meal and rest breaks and being compensated. I'd love to keep eating here and see what they say.
And I was told to tip with cash as opposed to card, because
yeah, tip stealing can happen even with the card, but cash and with cash. But yeah, cash is good.
Any other questions or comments?
Hi, I'm Gus May, and I supervise the employment practice at Pathetic Legal Services, what Alexandra was just referring to. And in the public policy context, one of the things that I found very helpful that can disarm a lot of people who aren't necessarily on the workers' side in their hearts is explaining the impact on other businesses. And you guys did mention that, but certainly with the passage of the minimum wage laws in LA City and unincorporated LA County, if these laws aren't enforced, the businesses who are already currently not paying are going to way underbid all the businesses who are trying to comply with the law. And I imagine there's going to be a lot more of the currently legitimate businesses who will end up starting to pay below, because otherwise they won't stay in business. So I think as a community and the business in the business lobby really needs to get behind the enforcement as well in order to make sure that they can all stay competitive.
We'll take one more if there is one more. Well, there's a lot of interest in this, obviously. We've got about 11 questions or 12 questions. Here's one up front.
Hello. So, going back to the issues of the workers, I understand that when they do come forward to ask for help, a lot of them are threatened with being blacklisted, especially in the Thai community. We're like the minority of the minority, right? We're so small, and I worked with some clients who said that they were threatened that if they came forward, they would be blacklisted. So no Thai restaurant would ever hire them again, even if the Thai restaurant that was paying legal wages would still not hire them. So how can we improve that? How can the Department of Labor address that issue? Because I think workers, if they had the chance, they would want to come forward and get fair wages. But I think there's fear that they will not be hired ever again if they did come forward.
It is a real problem. We work with mainly Korean and Latino workers, and that you can't compare or say anything's better or worse. There's just so many differences, and similarities. But one of the things was that many of the Korean-speaking workers felt that they were all blacklisted. The Latino workers were blacklisted by the Koreatown businesses and the Korean workers during one of our campaigns, our restaurant campaigns, market campaigns. I'm sorry, but the Korean workers really felt they could not work outside of Koreatown, and that they were limited to those businesses within that limited area, kind of like with the Thai businesses. And it's not that it's any better to be a Korean worker versus a Latino worker, but you're facing the exploitation either way. But at least the Latino workers didn't feel that if they were blacklisted in Koreatown that they couldn't get any other job. And so it is really, really hard. And it's one of the reasons why when we're dealing with many different ethnicities and races, we just have to be aware of the different ways that sometimes they're impacted. Sometimes workplaces are structured by ethnicity in really nasty ways, and there's also situations like that. So yeah, I don't have a solution, but we just have to. I think the more people that come together, then the stronger everybody feels.